First contact. The medbay doors hissed open, admitting a flurry of activity as medics rushed in with a hover stretcher. Dr. Elias Cooper looked up from his holo display, his eyes widening at the sight before him. On the stretcher lay an alien unlike any he'd seen in his years at Starbase Medical. Her skin was a deep, iridescent purple, marred by angry burns and lacerations. 4 arms hung limply at her sides, and a ridge of short, quivering spines ran along her scalp where hair would be on a human. "What have we got?" Elias demanded, striding over to meet the incoming team. Sahanian soldier, caught in an explosion during a skirmish with pirates, one of the medics reported breathlessly. Multiple fractures, severe spinal trauma, internal bleeding. She's the only survivor from her squad. Elias's mind raced as he assessed the alien's condition. Sahanians were a relatively new species to join the Galactic Alliance, and their physiology was still largely a mystery to human medical science. But that had never stopped Elias before. "Get her into Surgical Bay 3, he ordered, already pulling up what scant information they had on Sahanian anatomy on his holo display. "And someone get me Dr. Luvor. We're going to need Xeno expertise on this one." As the team rushed to prep the patient, Elias caught a glimpse of her eyes fluttering open. They were a startling shade of silver, clouded with pain but still alert. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Elias felt a jolt of something. Connection, understanding, a silent plea. "Don't worry," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear or understand him. "We're going to do everything we can." The next several hours were a blur of intense concentration, improvisation, and sheer determination. Elias and his team worked tirelessly, repairing ruptured organs, setting alien bones, and desperately trying to mitigate the damage to the Sahanian's unique spinal structure. Dr. Luvor, a gelatinous Maraxian with unparalleled knowledge of comparative xenobiology, provided crucial insights, but even Z was often at a loss. "Her neural pathways are like nothing I've ever seen," Luvor burbled, its translucent form rippling with excitement and concern. "The explosion seems to have severed several key connections. I'm not sure if conventional treatments will work." Elias finished, his mind already racing ahead. "Then we'll have to get unconventional." As the surgery stretched into its 10th hour, Elias made a decision that would change multiple lives, and though he didn't know it yet, the course of intergalactic medicine. "Prep the nano-regenerators," he ordered, ignoring the startled looks from his team. "But sir," one of the nurses protested, "those are still experimental. We haven't even begun human trials, let alone." "And we may never get a better chance to see what they can do," Elias cut her off. "It's her best shot. Maybe her only shot." With a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, the team watched as Elias carefully injected the microscopic robots into the Sahanian's spinal fluid. For several tense moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then, ever so slowly, the holo displays began to light up with signs of neural activity. "It's working," Luvor whispered, its gelatinous form quivering with excitement. "The nanites are building new pathways, adapting to her unique physiology." Elias allowed himself a small smile of relief, but he knew they were far from out of the woods. The next few days would be critical. As the team began closing up, Elias noticed the Sahanian's silver eyes were open again, watching him with a mixture of fear and, was that hope? "You're going to be okay," he told her softly, not sure if she could understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey the meaning. "I promise, we're going to do everything we can to help you heal." One of her 4 hands twitched, then slowly raised. Elias hesitated for just a moment before taking it in his own. Her skin was cool and smooth, almost silky to the touch. She squeezed weakly, and Elias felt that jolt again, a connection that transcended species and language. "Rest now," he said, gently placing her hand back down. "You've got a long road ahead, but you won't have to travel it alone." As the Sahanian drifted into a healing sleep, Elias turned to face the challenges ahead. He knew he'd likely face scrutiny for his unorthodox methods, and the task of rehabilitating an alien with such severe injuries was daunting, to say the least. But looking at the peaceful face of his patient, Elias felt a surge of determination. This was why he'd become a doctor, to push the boundaries of what was possible, to heal the unhealable, to make a difference in the vast, complex tapestry of galactic life. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. In the days that followed, the Zahanian, whose name they learned was Zira, began the slow, painful process of recovery. Elias spent countless hours at her bedside, monitoring her progress, adjusting treatments, and slowly beginning to communicate. It started with simple gestures and expressions, but soon they were using a rudimentary translation program. Elias learned that Zira had been part of an elite squad tasked with protecting civilian transports from increasingly bold pirate attacks. The mission that had nearly killed her had been a trap, a devastating ambush that had wiped out her entire team. "You saved me," Zira said haltingly through the translator, her silver eyes fixed on Elias with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Why? I am not human, not your concern." Elias smiled, shaking his head. "That's not how we do things here. Every life is precious. Every being deserves a chance to heal. Human, Zahanian, or anything in between." Zira was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, to Elias's surprise, she let out a sound that the translator identified as laughter. "You humans," she said, her tone a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "So strange. So hopeful." As the days turned to weeks, Zira's conditions slowly improved. The nano-regenerators continued their work, repairing damage that would have been permanent with conventional treatments. But progress was slow, and setbacks were frequent. Elias found himself becoming increasingly invested in Zira's case, spending more and more time with her even when he was officially off duty. He was fascinated by her resilience, her dry humor in the face of adversity, and the glimpses she offered into her alien culture. For her part, Zira seemed equally intrigued by Elias and the other humans she encountered. She peppered him with questions about Earth, human customs, and the history of their space exploration. Elias did his best to satisfy her curiosity, often bringing her books or holo recordings to help pass the long hours of her recovery. But as Zira grew stronger, new challenges arose. The experimental nature of her treatment drew attention from the medical community and Starbase administration. Elias found himself defending his methods to skeptical superiors and jealous colleagues. "The resources you're expending on this, alien," one administrator said with barely disguised disdain, "they could be used to treat dozens of human patients." Elias felt his temper flare. "And the knowledge we gain from this case could help us treat thousands in the future, human and alien alike. This is the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize neural regeneration across species." The administrator was unconvinced, but allowed the treatments to continue, for now. Elias knew he was on thin ice, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Every small victory in Zira's recovery, every new movement or sensation regained, felt like a personal triumph. As the first month of Zira's stay at Starbase Medical drew to a close, Elias helped her take her first steps since the injury. Her legs trembled with the effort, her forearms gripping the support bars tightly, but determination blazed in her silver eyes. "That's it," Elias encouraged, his hands hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. "You're doing great, Zira. Just a few more steps." With a grunt of effort, Zira pushed herself forward. For a moment, it seemed she might make it. Then her legs buckled, and she began to fall. Elias caught her instinctively, and suddenly found himself holding her close, her alien form pressed against him. Time seemed to stop as their eyes met. Elias became acutely aware of the strange, spicy scent of her skin, the gentle vibration of her spines, the rapid beat of her twin hearts against his chest. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of emotion that defied translation. Zira was the first to break the silence, her voice soft and slightly tremulous. Thank you, Elias, for everything. As Elias helped her back into her bed, his mind was reeling. He told himself that the rush of emotion he felt was just professional pride in his patient's progress, that the lingering warmth where she had pressed against him was just an artifact of Zahanian biology. But deep down, he knew that something had changed. The line between doctor and patient, between human and alien, was beginning to blur, and neither of them was quite sure where this newfound closeness might lead. As Elias left the medbay that night, his head spinning with conflicting thoughts and emotions, he failed to notice the shadowy figure watching him from a darkened corridor. Someone else had taken note of the connection between the human doctor and his alien patient, someone with their own agenda. The stage was set for a journey that would test the limits of science, ethics, and the very nature of connection between different species. Elias and Zira's story was only just beginning, and the ripples of their unlikely bond would soon be felt across the stars. Hope and healing. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the air as Zira awoke, her silver eyes blinking slowly in the dimmed lights of her private room. She took a moment to orient herself, still not quite used to the sterile environment of Starbase Medical. As consciousness fully returned, so did the dull ache that seemed to permeate her entire body, a constant reminder of how close she had come to death. Zira attempted to sit up, gritting her teeth against the pain. 2 of her 4 arms responded sluggishly, while the other 2 remained frustratingly immobile. A wave of frustration washed over her, but she pushed it aside. She was a warrior of the Zahanian fleet. She would not be defeated by her own body. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Dr. Elias Cooper stepped in, his face lighting up with a warm smile when he saw Zira awake. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a cheerfulness that Zira found both irritating and oddly comforting. "How are we feeling today?" Zira snorted, a sound that had startled Elias the first time he heard it. "We are feeling like we were caught in an antimatter explosion and put back together by a team of well-meaning but clueless aliens," she replied dryly. Elias chuckled, moving to check her vital signs on the holo display. "Well, you're not far off, though I'd like to think we're a little less clueless than we were a month ago." As Elias worked, Zira found herself studying him, as she often did. His features were so alien to her, the smooth skin, the shock of dark hair, the warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Yet, there was something about him that put her at ease, that made her feel safe. It was a disconcerting feeling for a soldier who had spent her life relying only on herself and her squad mates. "I've got good news," Elias said, interrupting her thoughts. "The latest scans show significant progress in your neural regeneration. I think we're ready to start a more intensive physical therapy regimen." Zira felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "And the bad news?" she asked, knowing there was always a catch. Elias's smile faltered slightly. "It's going to be hard, Zira. Probably the hardest thing you've ever done. We're going to be pushing your body to its limits and beyond." Zira laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Dr. Cooper, I once survived 3 weeks in the toxic swamps of Neurosix with nothing but my wits and a broken plasma rifle. I think I can handle a little physical therapy." "That's the spirit," Elias said, though his eyes held a mix of admiration and concern. "We'll start this afternoon. For now, try to eat something. You're going to need your strength." As Elias turned to leave, Zira felt a sudden urge to prolong their interaction. "Doctor," she called out, causing him to pause at the door. "I thank you for not giving up on me." Elias looked back, his expression softening. "Never," he said simply, and then he was gone, leaving Zira with a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. The next few weeks were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and slow, hard-won progress. True to his word, Elias pushed Zira to her limits and beyond. Hours were spent in the therapy room, relearning how to control her limbs, building strength and coordination. The nano-regenerators continued their work, but it was Zira's sheer determination that drove her forward. Elias was there every step of the way, encouraging, guiding, and sometimes just offering silent support when the frustration became too much. Zara found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone before, sharing stories of her homeworld, her military career, her hopes and fears. In turn, Elias told her about Earth, about the long journey humanity had taken to reach the stars. He spoke of the wonder of first contact, the challenges of integrating into a galactic community, and the driving curiosity that pushed humans to explore and understand the universe around them. "Your species is fascinating," Zara admitted one day as they took a break from a particularly grueling therapy session. "So fragile yet so resilient, so divided yet capable of such unity. How do you do it?" Elias smiled, handing her a container of nutrient-rich fluid designed for her alien physiology. "I could ask the same of you," he said. "Every species in the galaxy is a miracle, Zara, including yours." As the days passed, Zara's progress became more noticeable. She regained control of her lower arms, and sensation began to return to her legs. The first time she managed to stand unassisted, she saw tears in Elias's eyes, an alien expression of emotion that she was learning to recognize and appreciate. But with progress came new challenges. As news of Zara's unprecedented recovery spread, the starbase became a hub of scientific and political interest. Doctors and researchers from across the galaxy requested access to her case files, while diplomats from both human and Zahanian governments began to take notice. Elias did his best to shield Zara from the growing controversy, but he couldn't hide his own stress. Zara often caught him working late into the night, poring over data and preparing reports to justify his unorthodox treatments. "You need rest," Zara told him one evening, finding him slumped over his desk, surrounded by holo displays. "You're no good to your patients if you work yourself to exhaustion." Elias looked up, startled, then gave her a weary smile. "Look who's talking. Weren't you supposed to be in bed an hour ago?" Zara shrugged, a human gesture she picked up. "I was restless. Thought I'd take a walk. Which, I might add, I can now do thanks to you." Elias' expression softened, and he stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of work. "How about we both get some rest? I could use a break, and you, well, you're still on doctor's orders." As they walked slowly back to Zara's room, a comfortable silence fell between them. Zara found herself hyper-aware of Elias's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the sound of his breathing, the subtle scent that she had come to associate with him. It was unsettling, these new feelings stirring within her. At her door, they paused, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Zara looked up at Elias, studying the play of emotions across his alien face. Impulsively, she reached out with one of her lower arms, taking his hand in hers. Elias started at the contact, his eyes widening, but he didn't pull away. "Elias," Zara said softly, using his first name for the first time. I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." Elias squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "You don't have to thank me, Zara. Seeing you recover, watching you fight so hard, it's been an honor to be part of your journey." For a long moment, they stood there, connected by more than just their joined hands. Zara felt a tension in the air, a sense of something unspoken hovering between them. She saw Elias lean in slightly, his gaze dropping to her mouth, and felt her own breath catch in anticipation. But then Elias seemed to catch himself, stepping back and releasing her hand. "Good night, Zara," he said, his voice slightly husky. "I'll see you in the morning." As Zara watched him walk away, she felt a confusing mix of disappointment and relief. What was happening between them? And more importantly, what would happen when she was fully recovered? The future, which had seemed so clear to her before the accident, now felt uncertain and full of new possibilities. Little did either of them know, forces were aligning that would soon put their growing bond to the test. In the shadows of the starbase, plans were being set in motion that would threaten not just Zara's recovery, but the delicate peace between humans and Zahanians. As Zira settled into bed that night, her mind swirling with thoughts of Elias and the strange new path her life had taken, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. For better or worse, the next phase of their journey was about to begin. Breakthroughs and setbacks. The therapy room echoed with the rhythmic whir of exercise equipment and the occasional grunt of exertion. Zira stood before a holographic obstacle course, her 4 arms moving in careful coordination as she navigated the virtual terrain. Sweat beaded on her purple skin, her spine ridges quivering with effort. Elias watched from the sidelines, his eyes fixed on the holo-display monitoring Zira's neural activity. The progress she had made in the past weeks was nothing short of miraculous. What had started as a desperate gamble with experimental nanotechnology had blossomed into one of the most remarkable recoveries he had ever witnessed. "All right, Zira," he called out. "Let's kick it up a notch." Computer, increase difficulty by 20%. The holographic landscape shifted, becoming more treacherous. Zira's silver eyes narrowed in concentration as she adapted to the new challenges. Her movements, once halting and uncertain, now flowed with growing confidence. Suddenly, Zira stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. Elias rushed forward, but before he could reach her, Zira had already caught herself, using all 4 arms to stabilize her position. "I'm fine," she growled, frustration evident in her voice. "I can do this." Elias held back, respecting her determination. "Take a breath," he advised gently. "Remember what we talked about. Your body is still adapting. Push too hard and you risk a setback." Zira nodded, her breathing slowly steadying. With renewed focus, she resumed the course, her movements more measured but no less determined. As the session wound down, Elias couldn't help but marvel at Zira's progress. It wasn't just her physical recovery that impressed him. It was her indomitable spirit, her refusal to be defined by her injuries. "Excellent work today," he said as Zira toweled off. "Your neural pathways are showing increased stability. I think we're ready to start integrating some combat training into your regimen." Zira's eyes lit up at this, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "Finally. I was beginning to think you were trying to turn me into a diplomat rather than getting me back to fighting form." Elias chuckled, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "Just remember, we're still focusing on recovery. No actual combat for a while yet." "Spoil sport," Zira teased, but her tone was affectionate. As they left the therapy room, Elias found himself hyper-aware of Zira's presence beside him. The way she moved, the subtle shifts in her expression, the warm timbre of her voice, it all fascinated him in a way that went far beyond professional interest. Their growing closeness hadn't gone unnoticed. Whispers and sideways glances followed them through the corridors of the medical bay. Elias tried to ignore it, to maintain a professional distance, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. "Dr. Cooper." Elias turned to see Dr. Louisville undulating towards them, the Miraxian's gelatinous form rippling with what Elias had learned to recognize as excitement. "I've been analyzing the latest data from Zira's nanoregenerators," Louisville burbled. "The implications are extraordinary. We may be on the verge of a breakthrough that could revolutionize neural regeneration across multiple species." Elias felt a surge of pride and excitement. "That's fantastic news, Louisville. We should prepare a report for Dr. Cooper." The cold voice cut through their conversation like a plasma blade. Elias turned to see Commander Vex, the Starbase's head of security, striding towards them. The commander's cybernetic eye wared as it focused on Zira, who instinctively straightened to attention. "A word, if you please," Vex said, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. "Alone." Elias glanced at Zira, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll see you later, Doctor," she said, her formal tone a stark contrast to their usual easy banter. As Zira and Livo moved away, Elias turned to face the commander. "What can I do for you, Commander?" Vex's organic eye narrowed. "You can explain why you've been expending an inordinate amount of our resources on a single alien patient, Doctor." resources that could be better used elsewhere. Elias felt his temper flare, but fought to keep his voice level. Zira's case represents a major breakthrough in xenomedicine. The techniques we're developing could save countless lives, human and alien alike. So you say, Vex replied, his tone dripping with skepticism. But I can't help but wonder if your personal feelings for the alien might be clouding your judgment. Elias stiffened. My relationship with Zira is strictly professional, Commander. Vex's cybernetic eye whirred again, as if scanning Elias for deception. See that it stays that way, Doctor. The last thing we need is a diplomatic incident because one of our medics couldn't keep his hands off an alien patient. Before Elias could retort, Vex turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Elias seething in his wake. Meanwhile, Zira had made her way to the starbase's observation deck. She stood before the vast window, gazing out at the star-speckled void. The vastness of space had always calmed her, reminded her of her place in the grand tapestry of the universe. But today, her thoughts were too turbulent to be soothed by the cosmic display. Her feelings for Elias, once a mere spark of gratitude and admiration, had grown into something she could no longer ignore. It both thrilled and terrified her. Quite a view, isn't it? Zira turned to see a human woman approaching, her uniform marking her as a high-ranking officer. Captain Solari, Zira said, recognizing the starbase's commanding officer. I didn't realize anyone else was here. Solari smiled, coming to stand beside Zira. I often come here to think. It helps put things in perspective. She turned her gaze to Zira, her expression becoming more serious. I understand you've been making remarkable progress in your recovery. Zira nodded, unsure where this conversation was headed. Thanks to Dr. Cooper and his team. Ah yes, Dr. Cooper, Solari mused. He's quite dedicated to your case, isn't he? There was something in the captain's tone that put Zira on edge. He's dedicated to all his patients, she replied carefully. Solari hummed non-committally. I'm sure he is. But not all of his patients have garnered quite so much attention. There are those who question the wisdom of investing so much in the recovery of a single alien soldier. Zira felt a surge of anger, but years of military discipline kept her voice steady. The advancements made in my treatment could benefit both our species, Captain. Surely that's worth the investment. Perhaps, Solari conceded, but it does make one wonder about the nature of the connection between you and Dr. Cooper, a connection that some might view as inappropriate. Zira's spine ridges bristled. There is nothing inappropriate about our relationship, Captain. Dr. Cooper is my physician, nothing more. Solari held up a placating hand. Of course. I'm simply advising caution. Interspecies relationships can be complicated, especially in times of political tension. Before Zira could question this cryptic statement, the captain's comm badge chirped. If you'll excuse me, Solari said with a polite nod, leaving Zira alone with her troubled thoughts. As the day cycled dim to artificial night, Elias found himself unable to sleep. The confrontation with Commander Vex and the implications of Zira's growing combat training weighed heavily on his mind. He wandered the quiet corridors of the medical bay, eventually finding himself outside Zira's room. To his surprise, the door slid open as he approached. Zira stood in the doorway, looking as sleepless as he felt. I heard you coming, she explained, tapping one of her spine ridges. Enhanced auditory perception, remember? Elias smiled despite his troubled mood. Right. I forget sometimes how alien you are. Zira's expression softened. Not so alien, I think. Not anymore. She stepped back, a clear invitation. Come in. I think we need to talk. As Elias entered and the door slid shut behind him, neither of them noticed the small, spider-like drone that skittered across the ceiling, its camera lens focusing on them with sinister intent. In the shadows of the starbase, plans long in motion were approaching their climax. The connection between the human doctor and the alien soldier had not gone unnoticed, and there were those who saw in it an opportunity or a threat. that could change the course of intergalactic relations forever. For Elias and Zira, the greatest challenges and the true test of their bond were yet to come. Conflict and revelation. The soft glow of the medical bay's night cycle illumination cast long shadows as Elias stepped into Zira's room. The Zahanian stood by the viewport, her silhouette etched against the backdrop of stars. For a moment, Elias was struck by how alien she looked, the curve of her spine ridges, the set of her foreshoulders, yet how familiar she had become to him. "Zira," he began, his voice low. "What's wrong?" She turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting pinpricks of starlight. "I had a concerning conversation with Captain Solari today. She implied that our relationship might be viewed as inappropriate, that it could cause diplomatic issues." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "Commander Vex said something similar to me. Zira, I think there's more going on here than just your recovery." Zira nodded, her expression grim. "I've been sensing it too. The looks, the whispers. Something's not right, Elias, and I can't shake the feeling that we're at the center of it." Elias moved closer, fighting the urge to take her hands in his. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Your recovery is too important. The medical breakthroughs we've made could save countless lives across species. Is that all this is to you?" Zira asked softly. "A medical breakthrough?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Elias swallowed hard, his professional resolve crumbling in the face of the connection he could no longer deny. "No," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Zira, you've become so much more than just a patient to me. I know it's unprofessional. I know it could jeopardize everything, but I can't help how I feel." Zira's eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear playing across her features. She reached out, her lower right hand gently cupping Elias's cheek. The touch sent a jolt through him, warm and electric. "Elias," she murmured. "I." Suddenly, the room was bathed in pulsing red light as alarms blared throughout the station. Elias and Zira sprang apart, years of training kicking in for both of them. "Attention all personnel," the station's AI announced. "Security breach detected in Medical Bay 3. All non-essential staff evacuate immediately. Security teams to Medical Bay 3. Elias's blood ran cold. Medical Bay 3 was where they kept the experimental nano-regenerators, including the prototypes used in Zira's treatment. "We have to go," he said urgently. "If someone's after the nanotech, it could set your research back years," Zira finished, already moving towards the door, not to mention the danger if it falls into the wrong hands. They raced through the corridors, the sound of booted feet and shouted orders echoing around them. As they approached Medical Bay 3, they saw a group of masked figures emerging, carrying cases that undoubtedly contained the stolen technology. Without hesitation, Zira sprang into action. Her combat training, combined with her enhanced physiology, made her a formidable opponent. She engaged the intruders, her forearms a blur of motion as she disarmed and incapacitated them with ruthless efficiency. Elias, unarmed and untrained for combat, could only watch in awe. But as Zira fought, he noticed something odd about her movements, a slight hesitation, a tremor in her lower arms. "Zira," he called out in warning, but it was too late. One of the intruders, seeing an opening, fired a pulse weapon. The blast caught Zira in the chest, sending her crumpling to the ground. "No," Elias shouted, rushing to her side. He cradled her in his arms, panic rising as he saw the scorch mark on her chest, felt the erratic beat of her twin hearts. The leader of the intruders stepped forward, removing their mask. Elias looked up in shock, recognizing the face of Dr. Lovo, the Maraxian xenobiologist. "I'm sorry, Dr. Cooper," Lovo burbled, its gelatinous form rippling with what might have been regret. "But the potential of this technology is too great to be controlled by any one species. The consortium will ensure it's used for the benefit of all." Before Elias could respond, security teams burst onto the scene. In the chaos that followed, Lovar and the remaining intruders managed to escape with several cases of nanotech. Hours later, Elias sat by Zira's bedside in the intensive care unit, his head in his hands. The pulse blast had caused a cascade failure in her neural pathways, undoing months of painstaking recovery. She lay still, her usually vibrant purple skin pale and lifeless. "I'm so sorry," Elias whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "This is all my fault. I should have been more careful, should have seen the signs." "It's not your fault, Doctor." Elias looked up to see Commander Vex entering the room, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned Zira's vital signs. "We've known for some time that there was a spy in our midst," Vex continued. "We just never suspected it would be Lovar. The Meraxian's unique physiology made it virtually impossible for our security scans to detect any deception." Elias felt a surge of anger. "You knew? You knew, and you didn't warn us." Vex's organic eye narrowed. "We couldn't risk tipping our hand. And frankly, Doctor, your closeness to the patient made you a security risk." "A security risk?" Elias sputtered. "Zira nearly died trying to protect your precious technology." "And for that, she has our gratitude," Vex replied coolly. "But the fact remains, your relationship with her has compromised your judgment. The board will be reviewing your position, Dr. Cooper. I suggest you prepare yourself." As Vex turned to leave, Elias called out, a desperate idea forming. "Wait, the nano-regenerators, the prototypes they didn't manage to steal, they could save her." Vex paused at the door. "Those prototypes are now classified technology, Doctor. Using them on an alien patient would be a breach of at least a dozen regulations." "Please," Elias begged, his professional pride forgotten in the face of potentially losing Zira. "I'll face whatever consequences come, but don't punish her for my mistakes." For a long moment, Vex was silent, his mismatched eyes studying Elias intently. Finally, he sighed. "You have 24 hours, Doctor. Make them count." As the commander left, Elias turned back to Zira, a mix of hope and determination surging through him. He knew he was risking everything, his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. But looking at Zira's still form, he realized none of that mattered. "Hold on, Zira," he whispered, gently squeezing her hand. "I'm not giving up on you. Not now, not ever." As Elias set to work, prepping the prototype nano-regenerators for a last-ditch attempt to save Zira, he was unaware of the larger forces at play. The theft of the nanotech had sent shockwaves through the galactic political landscape. Accusations flew between species, old tensions reignited, and in the shadowy corridors of power, war drums began to beat. In a small medical bay on a distant starbase, the fate of two individuals had become inexorably intertwined with the fate of the galaxy itself. And as the hours ticked by, the question remained: could the bond between a human doctor and an alien soldier survive the crucible that was to come? Only time would tell. Crisis and courage. The soft beep of medical equipment provided a steady rhythm in the otherwise silent room as Elias worked tirelessly. His fingers flew across holographic displays, making minute adjustments to the nano-regenerator protocols. Sweat beaded on his brow, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but his focus never wavered. Come on, he muttered, watching as a swarm of microscopic robots entered Zira's system. On the neural activity monitor, faint flickers of light began to appear, like distant stars coming to life. Suddenly, alarms blared. Zira's body convulsed, her spine ridges standing rigid. No, Elias cried, frantically adjusting the controls. "Don't do this, Zira. Fight." As if in response to his plea, the convulsions subsided. The neural activity stabilized, then began to strengthen. Elias held his breath, scarcely daring to hope. Slowly, Zira's silver eyes fluttered open. "Elias?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand. "You're going to be okay." Zira's eyes focused, taking in her surroundings. The intruders, the nanotech. Some of it was stolen, Elias admitted. But you stopped them from taking everything. You saved us, Zira. She attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. How bad is it? Elias gently eased her back down. It was touch and go for a while. I had to use the prototype nanoregenerators to stabilize you. Your recovery, it might take some time. Zira's expression hardened with determination. Time we may not have. Elias, before I lost consciousness, I heard something. The leader, it was Luva, wasn't it? Elias nodded grimly. They mentioned a consortium, Zira continued. I think this goes beyond just stealing technology. There's something bigger at play here. Before Elias could respond, the door slid open. Commander Vex strode in, flanked by 2 security officers. Dr. Cooper, Vex said, his tone cold. Your 24 hours are up. I'm afraid I'm going to have to place you under arrest for unauthorized use of classified technology. Elias stood, placing himself between Vex and Zira. You can't do this. Zira's recovery could be the key to unraveling this whole conspiracy. Conspiracy. Vex's organic eye narrowed. What are you talking about? Zira pushed herself up, her voice gaining strength. The theft wasn't just about the nanotech. There's a group called the Consortium involved. I think they're trying to destabilize relations between our species. Vex's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed this information. That's a serious accusation, Lieutenant. Do you have any proof? Before Zira could answer, the station rocked violently. Klaxons blared as the A's voice echoed through the corridors. Alert. Multiple unauthorized ships detected. Shields at 60% and falling. This is not a drill. All personnel to battle stations. Vex's comm badge chirped. Commander. Captain Solari's voice crackled through. We're under attack. Unknown vessels using technology similar to our experimental weapon systems. Realization dawned on Vex's face. The stolen nanotech, he breathed. Elias turned to Zira, seeing his own fear and determination mirrored in her silver eyes. We have to do something, he said. Zira nodded, swinging her legs off the bed. Help me up. If they're using the stolen tech, I might be able to interface with it. My neural pathways are already attuned to the nanoregenerators. Absolutely not, Vex interjected. You're in no condition to. The station rocked again, more violently this time. The lights flickered ominously. We don't have a choice, Elias argued. Zira's our best shot at stopping this. For a tense moment, Vex stood silent, his mismatched eyes darting between Elias and Zira. Finally, he nodded curtly. Do it, but if anything goes wrong, it's on your head, Doctor. With Elias's help, Zira made her way to the command center. The scene was one of controlled chaos, officers shouting orders, tactical displays showing the dire situation outside the station. Captain Solari turned as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Zira. Lieutenant, what are you doing here? Quickly, Elias explained their plan. Solari listened, her expression a mix of skepticism and desperate hope. It's risky, she said finally, but at this point, I'm open to anything. Do it. Zira sat at a console, Elias hovering anxiously beside her. She closed her eyes, concentrating. The neural implants that allowed her to interface with the nanoregenerators hummed to life. On the tactical display, the enemy ships suddenly faltered. It's working, Solari exclaimed. Their systems are going haywire. But Zira's face was contorted in pain, blood trickling from her nose. There's resistance, she gritted out. Someone's fighting back. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her muscles. You can do this, Zira. I believe in you. With a cry of effort, Zira pushed harder. On the screen, enemy ships began to power down, drifting helplessly in space. Suddenly, Zira's eyes flew open. There, she gasped. I've got a location. Coordinates for the consortium's base. As the last enemy ship went dark, Zira slumped in her chair, exhausted but triumphant. Elias caught her, cradling her gently. "You did it," he whispered, awe and pride in his voice. "You saved us all." The command center erupted in cheers. Captain Solari immediately began coordinating with Allied forces to raid the consortium's base. Commander Vex approached Elias and Zira, his expression unreadable. "It seems I owe you both an apology," he said stiffly. "Your unorthodox partnership may have just prevented an interstellar war." Elias met Zira's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The barriers between them, human and alien, doctor and patient, had crumbled in the crucible of crisis. As the adrenaline of battle faded, replaced by the daunting task of rebuilding and making sense of what had transpired, one thing became clear. The bond between Elias and Zira had not only survived the flames of conflict, but had been forged into something stronger, more enduring. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time since that fateful day when a broken alien soldier had been brought to a human doctor, the future seemed bright with possibility. New horizons. The weeks following the consortium's attack were a whirlwind of activity. As the dust settled, the full scope of the conspiracy came to light. The consortium, it turned out, was a shadowy organization comprised of extremists from multiple species, all united in their belief that the growing cooperation between races was a threat to their own power and influence. Zira and Elias found themselves at the center of a galactic storm. Their unique partnership, once viewed with suspicion, was now hailed as a symbol of what could be achieved when different species worked together. They were called to testify before the Galactic Council, their story serving as a catalyst for renewed efforts at interspecies cooperation. On the eve of their appearance before the Council, Elias and Zira stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel carrying them to the galactic capital. The swirling colors of hyperspace danced beyond the viewports, a fitting backdrop for the tumult of emotions between them. "Nervous?" Elias asked, glancing at Zira. She snorted, a sound that never failed to amuse him. "I faced down Cronin battle cruisers and survived explosive decompression. A room full of politicians doesn't scare me, but there was a tension in her spine ridges that belied her bravado." Elias stepped closer, his hand finding hers. The gesture, once hesitant, now felt as natural as breathing. "It's not just the Council, is it?" he said softly. "Everything's changing so fast." Zira turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope of hyperspace. "When I woke up in your med bay all those months ago, I thought my life as I knew it was over. I never imagined," she trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words, "that you'd end up here? As a symbol of interspecies unity, with a human by your side." Elias finished for her, a small smile playing on his lips. "With you by my side," Zira corrected, squeezing his hand. "Elias, whatever happens next, I want you to know." The ship's intercom crackled to life, interrupting her. Dr. Cooper and Lieutenant Zira to the bridge. "We're approaching the capital." They shared a look of mingled excitement and trepidation. "Ready to change the galaxy?" Elias asked. Zira's mouth curved into a determined smile. "With you, always." The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of architecture, seamlessly blending the styles of a dozen different species into a harmonious whole. Elias and Zira stood before the assembled representatives, their story unfolding in a joint narrative that held the audience spellbound. They spoke of pain and healing, of prejudice overcome and bonds forged in the fires of adversity. But most of all, they spoke of hope for a future where the boundaries between species could be bridges instead of barriers. As they concluded their testimony, a hush fell over the chamber. Then slowly, applause began to build, swelling into a thunderous ovation. Species that had been at odds for generations stood together, united in their appreciation of what Elias and Zira represented. In the days that followed, decisions were made that would reshape the face of galactic society. New initiatives for interspecies medical exchange were launched, with Elias at the helm. The nano-regenerator technology, refined and carefully controlled, was to be shared among trusted allies, its potential to heal transcending old rivalries. Zira, for her part, was offered a position as a liaison between human and Zahanian military forces, her unique perspective valued as never before. But as the accolades poured in and the future beckoned, she found herself struggling with a decision. It was Elias who found her in the gardens of the capital, a rare quiet space amidst the bustle of galactic politics. She was staring up at the alien constellations, her expression pensive. "Credit for your thoughts," Elias said, sitting beside her on the bench. Zira was quiet for a long moment. "They've offered me command of a new joint task force," she said finally. "Humans and Zahanians working together to patrol the border regions. It's everything I ever wanted as a soldier." Elias felt his heart constrict. "That's wonderful, Zira. You deserve it." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "But it would mean leaving. Leaving this," she gestured vaguely at the capital around them. "Leaving you." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew he had to say. "Zira, Come with me," she blurted out, cutting him off. Elias blinked, taken aback. "What?" "Come with me," Zira repeated, her voice gaining strength. "The task force needs medical personnel. Your expertise in xenobiology, your experience with the nano-regenerators, we'd be lucky to have you. And I need you, Elias. Not just as a doctor, not just as a colleague, as a partner," Elias finished, his heart racing. "In every sense of the word." Zira nodded, a vulnerability in her eyes that she showed to no one else. For a moment, Elias was torn. The offer to lead the new medical exchange program was the opportunity of a lifetime. But looking at Zira, he realized that some opportunities came once in several lifetimes. "Yes," he said simply, marveling at how right it felt. The joy that bloomed on Zira's face was like a supernova, bright and transformative. She pulled him close, their foreheads touching in a gesture that bridged their two cultures. "You know it won't be easy," she murmured. "We'll be charting unknown territory in more ways than one." Elias smiled, his hand cupping her cheek. "Zira, from the moment you came into my med bay, we've been charting unknown territory. Why stop now?" Their lips met in a kiss that held the promise of 1,000 new horizons. As they embraced, the boundaries between human and alien seemed to dissolve, leaving only the connection between two beings who had found in each other something rare and precious. In the gardens of the galactic capital, under the light of unfamiliar stars, a new chapter began. For Elias and Zira, for humanity and the Zahanians, for the entire galactic community, the future stretched out before them, vast, uncertain, and filled with limitless possibility. Their journey had started with a broken soldier and a dedicated doctor. It had weathered suspicion, overcome prejudice, and survived conspiracy and war. Now, as they stood on the brink of a new adventure, Elias and Zira were more than symbols of interspecies cooperation. They were pioneers, partners, and proof that even in the vast, often cold expansive space, the warmth of connection could flourish. As they walked hand in hand towards their new future, both Elias and Zira knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In each other, they had found not just healing, but hope for themselves, and hope for a galaxy that was only beginning to understand the true power of unity in diversity. The end of one story was just the beginning of another, and for Elias and Zira, the greatest adventure of all was only just beginning.